right. Hey, everybody, and welcome to our newest segment of JAG University. Here today with Liz Godinez, my good friend and partner here. And we're going to talk about some issues in the insurance industry surrounding cannabis, the distribution, the transportation. Liz has a lot of experience in dealing with these types of clients and these risks. So, thought it'd be great to have her here to kind of run through some situations. So Liz, you've been doing this for a little while. Mm-hmm. Kind of, what are some trends that you see in the industry, or what's your general commentary?
Kevin, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here with you guys today. This is a topic that I enjoy talking about. I have a couple of companies that I insure now that are in the cannabis industry, mainly in California. And what I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of these manufacturers or growers also have a transportation aspect of their business. They either outsource the transportation, or some of them are now actually onsourcing it. So it's part of their everyday operations. I have an account specifically where they purchased, the Sprinter vans, and they distribute to all their retail locations. And with that, the auto is a little bit tricky because most of these are crossing state lines. So in order for you to cross state lines, you would have to have a license in that state that you're crossing to. So for example, if it's Utah, then it's best if you have a location in Utah or active license in Utah. That way, with the insurance portion of it, you're not, just crossing state lines into a state that you have no coverage in.
Got it.
So, the commercial auto part of it is tricky with that. If you don't cross state lines, we have multiple carriers that will insure you. They just want to know what you're carrying, if it's cash, if it's cargo. We can pretty much insure everything. Cargo being the most of it. I mean, if you're going to be manufacturing pre-rolls or you're going to be transporting stock, you want to make sure that your product is covered in case somebody steals it or, holds you up at gunpoint and wants to take your cargo, right? So you got to make sure that that's protected. We can do limits anywhere as low as, $5K, $10K, up to $1 million, $2 million, whatever it is that you have in value. Sometimes underwriters will want to see a contract if the cargo coverage is very high, but for the most part, it's pretty open.
Very cool. And then, with this industry as a whole, it's challenging because you're so limited. For example, there's not a lot of companies that will transport your cargo, not a lot of companies that will transport your cash, not a lot of insurance companies that will insure you. And then state by state, it all keeps changing. So it really seems to me from, looking at the outside in is when these companies are building their business model, they really need to take a lot of this stuff into account. And it would make sense to talk to someone like you first when they're kind of figuring out their strategy, where it's like, hey, how can I scale in a way where I'll be able to maintain coverage?
Correct.
And what kind of corporate structure suits me well? And we were speaking the other day about an account you have where, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of these companies have to bring on board into their own umbrella of employees things like transportation and security, and how they structure it corporately can have a big effect in their ability to obtain insurance. Mm-hmm. So tell us about that situation that you saw.
Yeah, so a lot of these companies, they do outsource security, some of them in-house security. This one specifically in-house is security. So if you're going to have drivers and you're going to have security guards and you're going to have your operations, it's important to make sure you talk to an agent or kind of get a feel for how that's going to impact your insurance, because the same carriers that write security guards don't want to write anything in the cannabis industry. Or if they do the guards, it's just the security guards. So you can't have, manufacturing or the drivers in that policy. So it is best to split that and maybe have, a company that does just security, one that does just the driving, and then one that does manufacturing. We can sometimes pair up the drivers and the manufacturers. That's, a possibility. But if it's their security, they always want to have those separate just because of the laws, and it's still not federally, governed and things like that. So if that's the case, then definitely speak to your agent, see what's the best way for you to structure that, what's the most cost-effective way. You can sometimes do it all under one policy. It really just depends on how much you have of that exposure.
Yeah, it is interesting to me because, I'm a former underwriter too, and you look at the risky types of insurance. Right. Transportation's risky. Security's risky. And then on top of that, cannabis is this whole other animal. And then you're combining it.
You're like, no. if you're an underwriter, those are like all the red flags, right?
Yeah,
So,
all together in one thing. So it's almost, what makes it easier is to kind of separate them out,
right.
have your security here, your transportation here, your actual operations
Mm-hmm.
where you're growing or you're selling separate under, different corporate entities.
Yep.
And then insurance companies, it's easier for them to stomach it. Instead of saying, okay, I have a grower, distribution company, transportation, and security,
All
insure
in
it.
one, right.
It's like, whoa, I mean, that's so much risk.
Yeah, I know. And, as an underwriter, they all have different rates. So the
Yeah.
same rate that you're using for security guard is a lot higher than the rate you're going to be using for somebody that's doing the pre-rolls in a manufacturing warehouse. So it is, it's super important to keep that structured and make sure you have a lot of communication with your agent. I know there's a lot of moving parts, and you'll pick up a contract, and that contract will require you to, I don't know, ship $2 million a year. Well, you need to hire people, and the last thing you think of is how that's going to impact your insurance.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have somebody that's a professional to kind of guide you and help you to make sure you're protected.
Yeah, and to help you help them. So it's like,
Yeah.
if I'm a cannabis company and I'm even in the early bidding stages on a contract, I might get a $2 million order where I distribute to these 4 states.
But that can be $100,000 in insurance premiums.
And I should tell you in the early stages so you can start testing the waters. So it's not like, hey, by the way, executed contract, it ships out next week. What do we do about insurance? And it's like, whoa, like,
we can't get it.
yeah. And everything goes out the window. So, I mean, don't want to overload people too much. This has been really good. But one more thing I wanted to ask you was just kind of, have you seen things kind of change or soften up or get easier over the last few years as far as cannabis? And we've seen kind of states and the federal stance get a little bit less tough.
Definitely. As the states are legalizing it, I have seen more action like now in Utah, Michigan. I'm getting a lot of submissions from those states, whereas before it was just California or Colorado, A lot of the carriers now see that this is a profitable industry, and it's an industry that they can charge on,
Yeah.
and because not a lot of carriers actually want to come into this sector of insurance. So the carriers are definitely opening up. They're broadening their coverages. They're offering, cash protection, which back then they didn't even think of. Crop protection. I know that you are working on something that for crop. Before, you couldn't get crop coverage. You couldn't get coverage for pesticides. You couldn't get coverage while it was in growth, like any of that. So now I know you can pretty much from seed to bud kind of insure the whole thing. So I am seeing it open up more, and a lot of other players coming in. And I think that that's going to really develop over the years. And hopefully, everybody wants to insure this because it's profitable and there's a lot of money to be made on all ends.
Awesome. Well, just to kind of recap, my biggest takeaway here is find a good agent that knows what they're doing as far as cannabis and get them involved early.
Yep. And structure. Make sure you structure your operations. Make sure you have a clear understanding of what's covered, what's not covered. There's a lot of exclusions in those policies.
Yeah.
And so just talk to a professional, and just like any other industry, it's, you want to make sure it's covered right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. JAG University, the Cannabis Special with Liz Godinez. Liz, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. It was fun. Thanks.
All right.